back in March, we had an event called TWX. I'm sure you must have heard of it. TWX happened in March earlier this year, and we received a lot of appreciation for the way it was hosted, the way people came. They found a platform to share their stories, their views, their thoughts on the current trends across technical writing industry. And taking inspiration from that event, we have come to TalkX, where we deep dive into a lot of topics in a singular session. We are going to deep dive into a singular topic in one session, and we're going to have multiple other sessions, so definitely keep an eye out for that. And with that said, I think it's time that I introduce you all to our panelists for the day. I'll get started with Siddharth. Siddharth, he mentions in his bio that, he's trying to complicate his current self so that it can become easy for his future self. And he's doing that currently. He's easing the lives of many people at Fountain as the head of engineering. Welcome to TalkX, Siddharth. Very, very glad to have you here and share your insights on, the topic for today. Our next panelist will be Purusottam. He has been a technical writer across various big established companies like Think Nokia, Quest Global, and Capgemini, and a lot more. He has written API and CLI documentation for developers, for chatbots, and various others, rigid documentation. He's simplified all of that for, everybody. And, we're very honored to have you here, Purusottam. Thank you for, joining us
Thank you
today.
so much.
Our next panelist will be Meeta, and I am very humbled, the fact that she has 25 years of experience in writing, technical writing. She has managed teams for all these years, and, she's straight true she's at her heart a technical writer through and through. She's been at the helm of technical writing as the director at her previous two companies, and is currently a manager at Google. She's mentioned that during her introduction as well. So Meeta, welcome to TalkX. Very excited to dig into, collecting all the joys of technical writing that you have amassed all throughout these years. And of course, we have Palguna, our very own from Razorpay. Palguna is working as a senior technical writer currently, and he handles a lot of complex products of Razorpay, like route, subscriptions, and a lot more, along with the APIs, of course. Palguna previously had worked in Dell and many other such companies, and across complex industries like healthcare and IT and consulting, and has amassed over 10 years of experience. So this is our panelist lineup for today. I hope you all will have a very great, enjoy the session as much as I am enjoying hosting this at the moment. Let me introduce the topic. I completely missed that out. I think you might have noticed that I specifically mentioned Hello World in the introduction. And that's very intentional because our topic for the day is writing for developers. And we all know the very first code that most of us, whether we are a coder or not, have written the code for, printing Hello World. And, with that segue, let's get started into, this session. My first question will be to Siddharth. So you are currently, head of engineering at Fountain, and you've probably written code for for all of your life so far. And I would like to ask you what you consider is a very good developer documentation. And if you were to write a documentation personally, what are some things you would be looking for and you would advocate, very profusely that, yes, this should be there in the documentation?
Okay, so one thing for everyone, so effectiveness, one is the first question, and second is what would I advocate in terms of what I would expect from the documentation, right? So effectiveness really depends on how easy you're able to make it for someone to understand. You've mentioned Hello World, and that has become a standard for most documentations for programming languages to start with. Is because it clear out shows you most of the basic things that you would be doing. So that would be simply printing out something somewhere, defining how something is supposed to be written. And it doesn't really need to be explained unless you're actually having something different from other languages. So effectiveness really depends on how well you're able to write something for the gray line user. Now, what I mean by the gray line user is the person who's not a beginner, nor is he someone who's very advanced. He's just someone who can handle what is written. Because when you're writing for beginners, you can be very simplistic. This is what I'm doing, and this documentation can get as huge as you want, like, because you're trying to explain all the context that you know about it. For someone who's advanced, you're just like, bro, this is the code. You can read and just go ahead, do whatever you want with it. For someone who's in the middle, you actually have to balance that out. So you need something that's showing an example. And this example needs to be covered with a pretext, which is basically defining what kind of context this example is for. And then you have the reference to the example, which is either defining. So if we take an API example, so something like a REST API, you would just give that this is the URL, this is how you make a request to it. These are the parameters that the basic example has. But then that is not what it's limited to. You might have more examples, more parameters that can go through. And this is what your secondary context is. So this ends up giving the user, most users, I would not say every user, but most users, structure that they can follow wherever they want. So if they're anywhere in your documentation, the structure is pretty clear. I want to copy an example, that's on the middle. I want to understand what I can change, that's after the example. I don't understand the example, that's above the example, giving me the context of what I'm writing. So I would say that is what I would expect in terms of documentations. And this is something that's been standardized across board. So it's not something new to anyone who over here who's been writing documentation. In terms of whether I prefer code first style documentation or whether I prefer guidance style documentation, I would say I prefer guidance style documentation, because a lot of time, whatever you're writing, so you are someone who's writing that technical article, right? So you already understand what it is because you either test it out, you are either directly in communication with the technical team who's giving you that data. Someone else who's coming in cannot make those assumptions because their assumptions are different from whatever you were having when you were writing it. So when you are giving a guide, when I say a guide, you might call it as a recipe, a guide, a blog post with regards to a certain context. You end up clearing those assumptions as you go down with the explanation. So I would say that would be what I would expect from what do you say, tools or CLIs, APIs, whoever are writing. Have your API reference, that's good and great, but have some kind of a recipe section as well so that you can make it clearer for people who don't really understand much of what the context of the original documentation is. I think that's about it.
So it's a very fine balance between effectiveness and expectation. Like, of course, the user is going there with an expectation to get something, to understand, or either to test. And having a proper structure to understand will help a developer a lot.
Yeah. So if you have the same structure everywhere on your documentation, sorry to cut you, but if you have the same structure throughout the documentation, it's much more easier to browse through. Like the primary reason someone comes on your documentation page is for the search, and second for the example, or basically understanding how to use it. So if the structure is consistent throughout the board, it's much easier for them to browse through your documentation.
Becomes very predictable in that sense. They can browse, and the user experience, of course, gets boosted a lot in that sense, because they know what they're expecting and they know where they'll get it eventually. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? If not, I will move, ask Purusottam the same question. What are not exactly the same, but something in the lines of what Siddharth has mentioned. What are some practices that you would enforce as a technical writer to meet where the developer wants to come and find the information? So on various API documentation, we've looked at people using visual elements. We've used other media elements which improve what would I say, interactivity as well. So can you give us an insight into what you are thinking as a technical writer while writing documentation for developers?
So basically, for the developer, there's a lot of aspects involved in this for the developer documentation. Because if we consider as a REST API documentation, there's a lot of methods and responses are available, and other thing also. So you might have give the particular endpoint, and based on the endpoint, they are coming with different kind of methods where it's particularly give you the scenarios how your configuration of the result will be taken, right? So apart from your REST API documentation, we also can give some as a developer, we can give some other example, like your troubleshooting guide or configuration guide. How can they actually when troubleshoot? It's basically whenever you go or develop any kind of documentation, is basically keep in mind that how your developer could be, or any other, or any end user could be empathy. So you can, all or as a technical director, you have to always keep in mind how it be empathyness your documentation is. So those are the things you need to keep in. So in REST API documentation, you have to create some tabular format, or as a encoder things or code editor kind of thing you can insert over there. So that way you can give some what I say some addition to the your audiences or the developers, so that they can easily take the input. In the same time, in alternative way, you can take the input from themselves as well. So that's how it is from my point of view.
Can you tell me a little more on what you meant by take something from themselves as well?
So when
Like,
you are actually taking some input from them, like for a particular endpoint, so you need some results, right? Or the configuration information. So if it is put methods or if the delete method, there's a two different scenarios for particular inputs, right? So in that cases, when you are giving some tabular format, so in one way you are actually giving the inputs, in another way you are also taking the some additional input for the other end user. So it's work vice versa.
you're taking something from the developer in order to give a result, which
Yes.
will show you how the certain method is going to work,
Yes.
especially in case of an API.
Yes.
So
It's
we are trying.
respective is basically for the respective methods.
Okay, okay. So we're looking more at how the developer is able to test and arrive at the results. Have I gotten you right?
Yeah, kind of thing, but no. It's like you are also giving the I mean, you are taking the result from the developer perspective, and it is tested by the developer or the tester. Okay, but the easiness is that it is quite empathy for them to understand, okay, this document having created for this particular endpoint, and this is the result based on the particular methods. So when they refer the document, they find it very empathy. So it is actually for them as a developer documentation.
Right. I think now I get you much better.
Got
It's
it.
not just about testing, it's about knowing what the user is expecting when they're going there. Like Siddharth has
Yeah.
already mentioned there.
Yeah.
Expectation and meeting where they are wanting to meet.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So can you talk of any example that you've encountered in your life where you've tried to you've come across a very severe or a very complex documentation and your approach towards how you successfully implemented that?
For me.
Yes,
So
from your
basically,
experience.
so if I take some example about one kind of architecture guide, so architecture guide is basically for the, it's also developer document, also for the end user, because it's end of the day the document is used by the our tester or the developer, right? So when you architecture, there's a lot of architecture component involved any particular system, right? In terms of your front end, back end, in terms of your database and other Kubernetes, I mean the other component, right? So whenever you are actually giving some visuals, and based on the visuals, you are documenting all the component and how they interacting along with the APIs. In that cases, actually I already created a document from the scratch level, and it also give you some ideas how all those architectural component interact with the each other, right? So architecture guide is very much important for the your developers and the tester. It's basically purely for the R&D sites. So in that architecture guide is basically give you the idea how your front end, back end working to within themselves along with the database. So yeah, that's how actually we have developed the document for the end user. I mean the R&D team.
Which means that there is a lot of data that another team maintains, and you will have to be in constant collaboration with them to retrieve that data to make sure you're converting that into easily explainable topics.
Yes, actually, what you as a technical writer, what my responsibility is to taking the complex idea, make it in simple for the every users, be it a layman or the your tech savvy person. So when the document has been referred by the tech person, they could understand. Okay, these are the components have been involved, and that is how the document have been derived. Okay, but when the layman refer the document like any kind of end user, they also feel the same empathy the documentation have been done. So I have to collaborate all the stakeholder, be it a product owner, be it a developer, be it a tester, so that all the input have been gathered together, and it's document in easy way.
Right. So on this note, I will ask Meeta. There's a lot of collaboration involved when we're writing technical documentation. So even within our organization, we are frequently relying on engineering. We're relying not just on designs, we are relying on them for various things. And keeping time with what the product is when the product is going to get released, and keeping the relevancy of the entire document. What are the best practices that you are enforcing in order to ensure that, that there's very smooth collaboration between all the teams and everything is happening, on time?
Very good question. And I'll talk from, as I mentioned, I'm a writer at heart, so I'll answer as a writer first. Um, one of the first things and this is what I think Siddharth also mentioned, very important point. A lot of us dive right into writing. We get a project and we jump into it. We forget to analyze who our audience is. So sometimes you might be writing for a beginner audience. Sometimes you might be writing for an advanced audience, and the way you write for them is absolutely different, right? And this is something that even Siddharth as a developer has pointed out. And that is something that I always, whenever I've not asked this question, I've run into problems as a writer. So one of the first things I do is try to talk to the stakeholders. Um, the most useful stakeholders in this area would be your product manager. Make friends with your product manager, because they are usually the people who get beaten up because of bad documentation. So they know the pain points. They've been there. They've spoken to your customers. So a lot of us, when I was a rookie writer, I used to hate talking to product managers because they would ask 50,000 things, right? But as I grew into my career, I realized that they are actually very useful folks if you can manage to tap into their knowledge. So it's very, very important when you're starting out with a project, especially and forget about not only API. Actually, I find API documentation the easiest thing in the world to do, because it's very, I mean, I might be saying something very controversial maybe, and I can elaborate on it later on. But API documentation for me is brain dead work. It's quick, it can be done very fast, and it's formulaic. Whereas the conceptual information is where your metal as a writer is tested. So coming back to my answer, first thing I like to do is try to understand audience. Uh, yes, we all work with very, very tight deadlines, but it would serve you really well if you did your research, if you spoke to enough people to figure out who the people you are writing for. And Siddharth also touched upon a very, very important thing. I was violently nodding my head when he was saying that. He said, try to write for middle ground. So not the most basic audience. You don't have to explain everything in the world. You don't write for uber advanced audience who you don't have to explain anything about, but you need to write for the middle ground, the audience who knows something and doesn't know a lot. So that actually is the hardest audience to write for, because that's where your metal as a writer comes in. You need to decide what I need to keep and what I need to throw away. So when you're starting out, when I was a rookie writer, I was shameless. I would ask 50,000 questions. So I would ask questions like, should I keep this information? I think this is the audience that I think I'm writing for. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And would this information be useful for them? And that just listening to those answers helped me grow quite a bit. So that is one thing. And another thing is, a lot of us show up into the meetings without any prior preparation. Uh, uh, okay, we got a project, and I need to talk to my stakeholders. I spend 15 minutes before the meeting trying to quickly figure out. Nah, if you want to be a good writer, if you want, if you really want to make your mark as a writer, then you need to do your research. Uh, you need to read the docs that are available to you, holler for docs that are not available to you, talk to people, do your research, go into the meeting. And the more targeted questions you're going to ask, the more your developers will love you. So this is something that I learned over the years. Uh, uh, the developers, they are really, really smart people, but they don't have time as much as you don't, right? So respect for their time. So if you let them know that you are going out of the way to um, to make their lives easier, they will make your life easy, much easier, let me tell you. And you don't even have to take them out for lunch. So so another thing that you need to do is do research. And these are the things, no matter how short your product is, your project time is, you should never compromise. And if this a lot of us are action oriented, we jump right into action. We want to start writing. But if you haven't done your homework, then you will have to, most probably, at some point in time, someone will tell you that this is not what we wanted, and you will have to throw away what you've done and start all over again. So do your homework. Is So you are asking me for best practices. Know your audience, do your homework, ask targeted questions. And to come back to my assertion about writing for developers, API documentation. Um, API documentation, if you figure out the formula, and I can help you figure it out. If you figure out the formula of writing API documentation, it's the most cut and dry writing you'll ever do, most brain dead, because the parameters are all there, whether it's request, whether it's response. Um, all of it is there. You just have to put it together in a way that your developer can understand. And so figure out the formula of writing for audience. And sorry, not writing for audience. Figure out the formula of your API documentation. And Siddharth again said a very, very, very important thing. He said consistency. Our brain, it accepts information. If you do some research into UX principles, it's all about how your brain accepts information. Your brain accepts information. If it's in the same format over and over again, your brain accepts it fast. If you change, if you try to show your creativity and try to try to see if they are awake or not, they will hate you, because your brain has to work extra hard to go back uh, to try to understand something that it was understanding in a different way. So so consistency, and listen to your developers. Seriously, we should let Siddharth talk a lot more. So does that answer your question? Is there anything that you think I should talk more about?
No, this has definitely answered a lot of my questions regarding, what it means to walk into a meeting and, be prepared, and the fact that collaboration works well when you're actually talking to people, and the fact that if you want to talk, you have to be prepared enough to talk about it. Am I
Exactly.
right?
Absolutely. What most of technical writers, and that is where I kick my team. So you asked, as a manager, what do I do? I kick my teams. I kick my folks um, uh, I don't like writers who just accept information. You should participate in those meetings as, if not equals, at least you should be able to talk some. You should be able to say what is important. So and that's where the prep comes in. So you need to prepare.
I really, really liked your answer. You've been very thorough, and the fact that I got to receive a lot of new information on this. Thank you for your answer. On that note, I will ask Palguna a relevant question, which is, what are the sort of challenges that you face as a technical writer when you are writing documentation for developers? Uh, you've written integration documentations, very complex ones, and you've written how-tos, which vary in the range of their complexness. So where are the challenges? What are the tricky areas that you're trying to get it in the right way possible?
Yeah. So in my point of view, right? So in my experience, like there are many aspects. It again depends on the document you write. Right. So it's like Siddharth and Meeta actually touched upon a lot of points which I noted down. So it's like the very first point which I used to face was, even though I'm from the tech background, to understand the concept. Right. If something comes up as a project, so first thing is, if I myself understand the concept well, then I can, put it in a document or make others understand. So how do we tackle this? It's like, as Mita said, don't jump into writing right away. So it's like, just read all the documents, whatever is available. Let's say B specs, or before the development happens, the engineering team would have had all the documents, right? Just go through it, make your points, have basic understanding, and you will definitely have a lot of questions in your mind. So just note it down as a questions. Then the next step would be, talk to the engineering team and SMEs, throw these questions to them, get the answers. Then you will get the complete, understanding of the concept. Then you can sit and start rating on the concept, right? So the next challenge would be like, get something to test and then write, right? So just with your understanding, don't jump into writing right away. Just have something to test, right? Even though if it is how-tos or it's like API reference guide, if you're writing, have the codes with you, understand the concept well, try that with the postman, get the proper result. If you get any error, get in touch with the SMEs or the engineering team or the developers. Ask those questions. I'm getting this error. What can I do? So have these questions, have these answers, and then start writing. So also with testing, you will be the first to test your products, right? You may get a lot of errors in UI, right? So there may be a small spelling mistake in the UI writing. You can point it out and tell them that this is what is, you can actually, correct it. Or there is an error, or I found this bug. Can you please fix it? Or is this expected? Is this a natural behavior of the product? Is this expected? Or can you fix it? So these type of, usability testing will also be done by a tech writer, right? So the next would be maintaining the consistency. That is also, I've evolved a lot with this, right? So you have multiple pages in your document. So, let's say terminology, right? So as Siddharth actually said, maintaining that balance between writing to a beginner, to an intermediate, and to a expertise, there is a lot of that is a crucial challenge that I have faced, right? So you will have to maintain that balance. So when an intermediate comes and reads your document, he should at least understand a basic of your concept and try to integrate. So that's how your document should be, always, we should always target of writing to that document. So the next one would be reader centric, right? When a reader actually starts reading it, he should not be alienated from the reading, or he should not feel bored, right? So again, it depends on the document you write. It's like if it is API reference, keep it concise. Give your codes, right? Give your response, give your parameters description, give the proper description of the API reference parameters, right? So when it comes to the product document you're writing or some dashboard related document, then give a bit more information about the product, how the product will help the reader, right? And then you jump into the integrations. How do I integrate this product? But before that, just give some required information and a complete information, right? How to start and how to end. And also in between, before you integrate, you should give prerequisites. So all this, the way you actually structure the content is very important. And that is where most of the writers actually face a lot of challenges. So how do I start and how do I end it? Right? Just that someone says that, hey, this is the dashboard and this is the steps you have to do. Don't jump into the steps right away. Give the prerequisites. Ask them, do we have any prerequisites? Anything that has to be done before the integration, before someone starts the integration, get that in the document, put that in the document. If you have any abbreviations, have them in the document, make them understand, and then let them start with the integrations. So, and then, localization is one more thing that I faced. I'm not sure how many of writers would have gone through it. So when it comes to localization, right? So it's like the style of writing would be different. Right, when it gets localized to other languages like Chinese or Japanese or Korean languages, the style of writing would be very difficult and it will be very different. So to overcome that, again, you will have to actually do a lot of research on localization. How do I write for a localized document? And in the end, what I felt was end to end. Own your product first, right? So when you are handling a product, own it first. So you just have the complete understanding of your product first, and then you will get to know the results, right? But then when there is a patch release happening or when some major release is happening, you would have had the basic knowledge or the complete knowledge of product. Then you can easily understand the concept of the new one that is coming in. So that way you can actually understand and write well. So when you yourself understand the concept well, then you can actually simplify that concept into a very good document for a reader. So, and also one more tip I would like to give is, this is what I learned when I was working with Dell. When you get a project, right? So a lot of people actually ask you to plan your project. So one of the manager actually taught me that you should plan your documentation release in a reverse way. Let's say it's like 15th September is the release date. So you plan your document release in the reverse way. Let's say it's 15th September, then you should be finalizing your document on 13th September. Then come back to the second review. When would I send it for second review? Let's say it's on 10th September. That way you plan in the reverse way. That would really help planning properly. And by the 15th of September, your document would be ready and freezed. If the release postpones also, you will be ready with your document and there will be no hurry. So that is one more tip I would wanted to give. So I think I've covered a lot of points. These are the challenges that I've faced in my career, at least. So yeah, that's about it.
Can I jump in for a minute, Sai?
Yeah.
I absolutely loved Falguna's answers. I can definitely see that he's talking from experience. One thing that I want to also, testing. I forgot all about testing. If you don't test what you've written, then you're not in my book, you're not a good writer. How can you send something out in the world without testing? So testing your stuff is very important. So if that means you need to learn Postman or any other tool that is doing rounds in the writing circles, then learn them. You will need to learn them, and a writer, Falguna also raised a very, very, very important point, that writer is the first user of any product. Writers can be very useful. You can be you can just be a writer, or you can be a writer plus plus, by doing some things that are just expected of us. For example, you are testing something and you run into a problem and you raise a bug. And I have as a writer, I've raised bugs and I thought nothing about them, and turns out they changed some aspect or some feature. They completely impacted that, right? And that's where you start gaining respect as a, not just as a writer, but as a part of the team. That's when your developers will start talking to you with respect. That's what we all crave for, right? Developers don't give us time, don't give us respect. So be useful to them. Save their backsides. If you will save their backsides, they will help you, go out of the way to help you. And another thing that I wanted to say, and something that Falguna raised was, I've been recruiting for a long time now, and one of my favorite questions that I ask any writer who wants to come to my team is, describe your product in 5 sentences. And you wouldn't believe it. It is one of the most simple questions in the world, right? And if you're working on a product for more than 6 months, you should know about it. But you would be surprised how many writers don't pass that litmus test. How many writers can only say 2 sentences and after that they have nothing to say, or you can see that they're just filling the gaps. You need to know your product. I believe that writing is a profession like teaching. If you don't know what you're talking about, your audience will know. So very good points there, Falguna.
I think that ties also into what Purusottam has brought up, the fact that you want to empathize with your user. And you cannot empathize with your user if you do not test the product, if you do not own the product, if you do not, be a user yourself and, write with that experience on, the documentation. I think Siddharth had something to add. Please go on.
So mine was a little more towards the development side, and this is, I'm not sure if there's developers on the call, but one of the biggest things that have changed, at least my outlook of documentation, is from a company, I think you guys know, Stripe. And the primary reason it has changed how I look at documentation is not just because they have good API documentation, it's because anything that goes wrong redirects you to the right documentation. So if you're using an API, if you're working with anything that they've built, and you made a request, you sent in parameters, something's gone wrong, it's not working properly, with the error code, you get a link to the documentation that will guide you with the correction. So this is more towards the development side of things, where the developers are also actually worried about something being done correct. And I think more writers can push forward or push on the developers key, hi, please add this so that people can have proper documentation and learn about it. So this is something very it looks like it's very minute, but it helps in the longer run.
Which means to add that just in case somebody goes wrong somewhere, so what would get that developer to get to where they want to go? Like, how would they execute the task? Give that documentation to them. Right.
So there's almost always cases where there are certain expected errors, like let's take Razorpay as an example. In certain cases, certain currencies, I cannot put certain numbers down. So that's an expected error. You know that as a writer, the developer knows that. I don't know that because I'm a new user. So for me to understand that that's blocked out, it either comes down as a description that we're not allowing so-and-so digits or so-and-so characters are not allowed for this parameter. Or you send me back to let's say a documentation on the Razorpay X site or the SDK site that this is something that is not allowed by us, and this is the reason for why we're not doing it. So it is obviously double work. It's not just technical writing anymore. You have to get it done. You have to get in group with the tech team, get it connected, see that it's working. So you have like 2 cycles that go through to just make sure it works. And it looks like a very small thing for the person who's reading it or who's using it. But the amount of work it takes obviously is a lot more than normally just writing the tech doc. But it helps. As in the long run, it helps.
That definitely makes sense, yes. On a lighter note, if you could replace the word documentation with something else, have you ever thought of what you would like to have proper documentation be called as something else. And this question is open for everybody. Please do take turns. Tell us what you would rather documentation be called.
So most of the thing right now, people are calling as an information developer as well. So basically, we are developing the information throughout our documentation. I mean, so documentation, first of all, we need to understand what is documentation. So documentation is basically a records, right? So a lot of information are there. So we need to record in a format we call it a documentation. So yeah, so we can call it as a information developer as well.
Any other answers? Not really. I've sometimes wondered. Yes, Meeta, please.
You've got me stumped. I'm really. I think you can hear me thinking. The only thing that comes to my mind is uh, I believe in the fact that if it is not documented, it doesn't exist. So must read or before you begin. Nah, you've got me stumped. I'll get back to you. I'm like that donkey who thinks of the answer the next day. So I'll probably respond to you tomorrow about this answer.
I personally feel I would name it as invisibility cloak, from Harry Potter. You just you become invisible. The content is right there, but then it's importance once you get there. And nobody else will realize that either.
Good
Uh,
point. Full
so
marks on.
yeah.
That's
So
I would I
yeah.
would
Yes.
say, while I agree to that, I am myself guilty for not reading the documentation when I was supposed to. But most of the time I would, or you could say, the visibility of the docs is really dependent on the tools you use to look up the docs. Like, if Google's not doing it properly or DuckDuckGo is not doing it properly, you end up missing it altogether. Now, you cannot blame them because your doc itself is missing the interconnection that was required. So it's a layer by layer thing. But I'm telling you, right, I've been guilty of doing that myself.
So I think I'll open this panel for others to speak also. Would anybody like to add on to the points that our panelists have discussed? We also have developers on call. We have an engineering manager, Ashutosh. So folks, if you have something to add, please do take this opportunity to speak about it. If not, I do have a question that we can have a small discussion on, which is how would you measure the success of a documentation? When would you consider that a documentation is successful? And how would you maintain that success in, the coming times? What are some practices that you undertake to do that? Would be my question to everyone. The panelists, all of you, please. Yes, Siddharth.
So is this with regards to as in the overall documentation with everything involved, or is it just with regards to the contextual content that you're writing?
So we're talking about developer documentation. So maybe we can try understanding how successful developer documentation is.
So the reason for that question is because you bring in a lot of variables into the picture when you say that. So one, if you're building an API reference, that updates every point of time, right? So you need to be updated with that. Now, this is something I wouldn't want humans to constantly go knock the developer's door. Did you change the spelling of this, and then go back and update it? So that's one variation that happens. It's a dynamic part of your API at this point. So you cannot have a human continuously go through it, check it, again, do it. So in that case, the effectiveness would be for it to be able to auto update based on any changes that have been done on the tech side of things. A few ways for this is basically, if you have some form of structured information on the code level, then that is basically what's again shown as an API reference. It doesn't have any other explanation. It's just whatever the developer thought is valid enough for me to be able to help other developers who are working with me. Then comes the part where you're actually sharing this publicly, and then you have a little more less in terms of variations because you're more, I would say, pointed towards basically explaining that one section or one change. For example, if I was to take in one of the Google Docs. So if you have anything from Google's cloud computing documentation, it's just explaining how cloud computing is supposed to be able to work and so on and so forth. And then Google adds in these help sections where basically if it requires some credential from your account, that credential is autofilled for you. So things like these make it easier for someone to actually browse through your documentation. So that I would count as effective documentation, because I'm doing less work overall as a developer. It's a lot more work for the actual person who's building that documentation website, but as a developer, it's a lot less for me to think, okay, is this something that will work? Do I try it out with so and so scenarios? Is this an SDK that I need to install? The less time I have to deal with installing, downloading, and trying it out, the more effective I would say documentation would be. Hence the question as to what context we're talking about.
Any other answers?
Can I?
Question.
Please go ahead.
Adding on to just what Siddharth said, we don't stop at just doing developer documentation. There is a lot of talk about developer experience in our Razorpay teams. So my question, Meeta, specifically to you, probably because you will be able to take this, is can documentation cover up the flaws that you have in the system? Can good documentation cover flaws?
No. Documentation is just the is just the clothes that your product wears. So if your product is basically flawed, documentation can't do anything about it. But you as a documentarian can do something about it. You can, as the first user, you can point fingers and ask questions and say, raise bugs. For developers, bugs are anathema. So raise bugs is the best way to getting their attention. Sending emails can be ignored, and chat messages can be ignored. Bugs, they have to be resolved. So does that answer your question, Sindhu?
Yes, to an extent. Yes, it
To an
does. Yeah. I was thinking of it from the product concept. I just think Google revolutionized their error messages. It was the first time we saw HTTPS 404 forbidden, go away, and then they came up with a message that says, "Oops, the page does not exist." I think even though you have probably hit a deadlock, the disappointment factor actually comes down. Maybe I can try some other. So, my thought process was in.
I see. I didn't get your question, Sindhu. My bad.
In the sense that if even though you hit a roadblock, you wouldn't feel very bad about that, because Siddharth was, I think I can link that there, because if you hit a roadblock, you would like to know where you would, eventually want to end up. How would you resolve that error that you're getting?
Exactly. That is why Stripe documentation, Stripe API documentation is a marquee documentation. It's beautiful. It's written by people who actually understand APIs, and that is one of the best documentation you can refer to when you're stuck. Is something that I would say. And yes, always remember, people are people, developers or writers or product managers or CEOs. It's about how to go back to what uh, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name. I apologize. What you were saying was that it's even if the user runs into a problem, you don't have to make it a world ending, world shattering experience. You can make it humorous, and that is the way Google deals with it. But I better I think I'll be shot at if somebody back at office hears this. But I prefer Stripe way of handling. There is an error. Here is the documentation. Go read it. This is the best way of advertising documentation. So they hold a very high place in my heart. So that is something that we are trying to bring in at Google. Janda leke khade hain. But let's see where we get to it. So, and to answer your question about how do you rate the effectiveness of your documentation?
Yes.
One of the things that I learned in a startup, I was just a writer and did not know the nexus between documentation and support. So when you write good documentation, chances are uh, your support, it eases the burden on your support. For example, when we did a lot of work on the documentation in one of my previous jobs, the support folks actually came to the documentation team, and they actually thanked us, and they told us that now when they get when they get a call at right now, they actually ask, the first thing in their script now is, have you read the documentation? So if you are addressing um, uh, as much as your if your documentation is effective, your support calls will go down. And here's the kicker: support calls are very expensive. Each support call, in one of my previous organizations, we did a math we did math on the cost of a call. The average cost of a call to when a frustrated customer calls your support executive is $50, and that was before inflation, before the Ukraine war. So right now it must be around 70. So that's a lot of money. So this is how documentation. So if you want to prove to your management your documentation is doing good, go talk to your customer support folks. They will tell you. They will be a very good gauge of your documentation. Product managers also. Product managers are the best friends of documentation are product managers and customer support folks. So this is something that I've learned over the years.
I think I agree with Nishtha. Yeah, the new goal is to reduce support calls. So on that note, I think we're reaching the end of our session. I definitely learned a lot as a rookie writer. Been in the system for less than 2 years, and I am having a eureka moment at the moment. So thank you very much, folks, for joining in.